On this Wednesday installment of Locked On Texans, John and I will continue our training camp breakdown of every position. Today, we take a look at the defensive line.
8 days away.
You are Locked On Texans, your daily podcast on the Houston Texans. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in, Locked On Texans family, listeners and viewers to this Locked On Texans podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your Texans football analyst, John, some sports guy Hickman. On the other side of the screen, Texans Credential Media member, Sports Illustrated's own Cody Davis. Thank you to all of our first-time listeners and viewers, Cody has the GOAT shirt on with J.J. Watt. We'll be talking about J.J. Watt, right?
And Andre Johnson.
But thank you to all of our first-timers. Please subscribe, like, and comment to the Locked On Texans podcast and wherever you listen to your podcast. Thank you to all of our returning listeners coming back to listen to Cody and myself continue to talk Texans football. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. The playoffs are now over with. The sports stopped sporting like we want them to, but this summer, FanDuel is hooking all customers up with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com/locked on to get started. Before we talk Texans football, from the bottom, middle, and top of our hearts, Cody and myself, we really want to pray for you guys and just say, man, we hope that our Texas listeners and everybody that listens across the United States and the world, but everybody that was impacted by the hurricane, we hope you guys are okay. If you have an opportunity, follow me on Instagram at Some Sports Guy. I will be resharing on my story places, cooling stations, feeding stations, anything that's helping our people right now in need. And we hope that you guys are able to pull together. And we're thankful that you're listening if you are listening. But overall, we hope that you guys make it to another day. Cody, the grind don't stop, not for us, and especially not for the Houston Texans as training camp starts in 8 days. We missed a couple of days, but now we're back. We did the defensive units, safety, corner, linebacker, but now I think the easiest of the bunch, grading the D-line unit. Take it away.
Yes, sir, and that's what we're going to pick off. We're going to continue our position previews, our position breakdown, entering the 2024 training camp. John, as you alluded to, 8 days away. And let's just start by grading, which I think is going to be the easiest grade outside of quarterback, of course. How did General Manager Nick Caserio and head coach D'Amico Ryans fare when it came to improving and revamping? And boy, did they revamp this defensive line. When you take a look at some of the defensive linemen who came back, Will Anderson Jr., Khalil Davis, Derek Barnett, Dylan Horton, and on Monday, late Monday night, the free agency signing, the free agency re-signing of Jerry Hughes. Those are your returning guys, the guys that the Houston Texans added to their defensive front: Danielle Hunter, Danico Autry, Fatu Kazakauzi, Mario Edwards, Marcus Edwards, and Solomon Byrd. John, let's just go ahead and just give a joint grade. We give the Houston Texans an A. How the way they revamped this defensive line. John, listeners and viewers, I know you guys have heard me say this before, but I just want to share it again. You guys know me. Going back 365 days ago, John, remember, I kept saying, in my opinion, one of the most important things for the Houston Texans was to re-sign Jonathan Gennard. Why? Because ever since they drafted him in the third, fourth round of the 2020 NFL draft, Jonathan Gennard has been one of the best defensive linemen and the best players for this organization throughout the start of their rebuild. You go on and you take a look at what he was able to do last year. Career year, 12.5 sacks. But not only that, you also got to take a look at the fact that that also was the first time that he was healthy. And what that I kept saying, they need to re-sign him. They need to re-sign him. They cannot afford to let that man walk out the door for 6'10" and Kirby. Well, they decided to let the man walk out the door for 6'10" and Kirby, and look how they were able to not only replace the services of Jonathan Gennard, but in some ways get better. You take a look at a guy like Danielle Hunter, a guy career year himself. What is he, like 8 years in the league now? 16 and a half sacks. And you just look at all of the defensive linemen that they were able to do, John, even though I was caught off guard by the re-signing of Jerry Hughes, even bringing him back and knowing what he meant to this organization during the 2022 campaign, and knowing that he has been a very productive defensive lineman for his entire career, man, Coach D'Amico Ryans and General Manager Nick Caserio, I think revamping this defensive line was by far their best work.
And absolutely. And when you look at the two guys at the top, Nick Caserio, your general manager, your defensive-minded head coach, and D'Amico Ryans, I think it was important for them to have the guys they believe can create pressure inside and out. And that's when you look at a Hunter and an Autry, both whom had career years last year, 23 tackles for loss for Danielle Hunter, 83 total tackles. Those are his career high numbers. 16 and a half sacks, career high number. Danico Autry, who's been in the league since 2014, this is his 14th in the NFL. Last year matched the amount of games that he started for a ball club. Career year in sacks with 11 and a half. Career year in tackles with 50 overall. Almost matched his career year in tackles for loss. Almost a career year again for QB hits. Those are two guys combined based off last year that is combined for 29 total sacks. Over 30 tackles for loss, right? And we know they're going to get after the quarterback. This is a defensive unit up front that, of course, stopping the run is going to be important. And they did a very good job of replacing the notion that this team can't stop the run last year, right? Because we know about the year prior, 170 to 97 last year. That's an expectation that I'm looking for this defensive front unit to uphold. Did a damn good job, right? But also think in terms of being better against running clubs, right? Jonathan Taylor still had monster games against Houston. They allow some of those teams that traditionally run the ball pretty well to still have some good moments for them last year for opposing teams. And whenever Houston got into shootouts with teams trying to come back and win the game, right, that's when you saw how can I put it? You saw teams move away from running the ball because they had to throw the ball to keep up with Houston's offense when Houston had those moments where they was hot. What concerns me, and I will say I still give this unit up front an A. What concerns me, though, the second D tackle. And that's going to be a competitive battle between the likes of, and let's take a look at the depth chart real quick, between the likes of Foley Fatukasi, Khalil Davis, Mario Edwards, and I'm curious to see if Dylan Horton, who's going to get his opportunity, and I don't have too much expectations for Horton, all things considered, but will he get an opportunity, kind of like a Mario Edwards, to kind of transition from the outside to the inside and compete for that D tackle position? So for us, grading the D unit, the D line unit is not a problem, but the biggest storylines at the defensive line, I think, is what we're going to really have a conversation about. So we're going to hop into that next. Biggest storylines at the D line position on the other side of the Locked On Texans break. The sports are not sporting like we want them to right now, guys. You got the WNBA. They got a lot of action going on over there. An exciting rookie race. The MLB is popping right now, but no more playoffs, right? Everything is slowing down, and we all love sports. That's why we do the show, really. But without the sports popping like we want them to, I know everybody's kind of looking around like what to do next. Let me tell you guys something. FanDuel lets you keep the sports going whenever you want. All you have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime you're in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day all summer long. Head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel is the official sports betting partner of the MLB.
Welcome back in, ladies and gentlemen, to this Wednesday installment of Locked On Texans as we continue our position previews, looking at every single position group heading into training camp, which will start on July 18th. John, when you take a look at the biggest storyline at defensive line, I'm not going to lie to you. When I got the notification Jerry Hughes came back, that is one of the biggest storylines that I'm looking at. And I'm not going to put it up there as to saying that, you know, it's a lot to it, but one, I want to know, why did he only play 2 games last year? Because if you remember, he only played 2 games, then he kind of just disappeared. There was no talks about retirement. There was no talks about an injury. There was no talks about an illness. So I just want to know what went on last year that caused him to be away from the team. And 2, and most importantly, with Jerry Hughes coming back, how does he fit within this rotation now? Because you take a look at guys like Will Anderson Jr., Danico Autry, Danielle Hunter. It's like, I'm wondering, where is he going to get the snaps that he needs to make sure that he continues to leave an impact on his team? Now, I get it, I understand it. He is older, and you taking a look at the situation, you're probably not going to depend on him, and the Texans should not depend on him like there was back in 2022. However, at the same time, if Jerry Hughes is coming back and has re-signed with this organization, I'm looking at it from a standpoint that, 1, he still feels that he could make an impact on his team, and 2, and most importantly, the team feels that they still need not only his presence in the locker room, but his presence on the field as well.
I don't know, man.
It's just interesting to me. Like I say, the guy almost went Justin Britt on us.
Right. It was a shocker, though. Started 2 games last year. Only 3 sacks for Houston, but he was in a limited role for this franchise that had made a significant upgrade at the end position. Looking at Will Anderson, also the emergence of a healthy John Grenard, played in 42% of the defensive snaps for Houston last year. So he only started 2 games, was available for more than that, had some, moments where you could scratch your head and say, where is Jerry Hughes? But I don't know if that's the biggest storyline for me. And I think there's a couple of things that trumps that. Number 1, as I mentioned, we know that it's going to be Will Anderson, Danico Autry, and Danielle Hunter. According to ESPN right now, the next defensive tackle spot is filled by Foley Fatukasi. Is he a starter for this defense? That D tackle position, and I'm going to go as far as to say that D tackle could also be placed up there with safety as a position Houston can look to bring in somebody once we start looking at the cut down day and available players. And keep in mind, once again, Houston is now a hot spot for free agents, I would say, with the emergence of C.J. Stroud and the leadership known throughout the league and DeMeco Ryans, but they also have nearly $18 million in salary cap that they could use. Hopefully they can send you and me some money so we can kind of get through this hurricane a little bit. But I think the D tackle position, I think for me, is the biggest storyline going into camp, because as of right now, Mario Edwards Jr., Tim Settle, Fatukasi signed over in free agency, brought over from the Jacksonville Jaguars, and Khalil Davis. I think all 3 of those players could compete for the starting job for the maybe 1 technique or maybe 3 technique, however Houston wants to play their D tackles for who knows. But that's the biggest storyline for me heading into camp. And I would also add to that, when I look at the biggest storylines, is how often will we see a rotation at the D tackle position? I think at the end of the year, we're going to see both Danielle Hunter and Will Anderson play roughly 85 to 90% of the defensive snaps if they're healthy, knock on wood, and there's no issues, no lingering issues, especially if they're able to go the day of the game. How fresh does Houston want to keep Danico Autry, who, by the way, has been in the league since 2014? and you look at Mario Edwards, he's a guy that has made some improvements in the NFL, former second-round pick, 35th overall to the Vegas Raiders. But when you look at his career and what has happened since entering the NFL, you see a lot B-gap, out. He's played inside, played out. I think the last couple of years, you've got the better version of him because of his versatility he's bringing to teams. And so could he get that starter role, and could him and Danico Autry be interchangeable between the two? So I'm excited about this D-line position more than any other position. I think so because there's a player that I really like. I always love a good story, but I'm also seeing in the offseason Khalil Davis work his tail off to get to where he wants to be as a starter. Can he push whoever is in front of him on that depth chart out the way, as we got Chance the dog in the background making an appearance on the show?
Yeah, man. But, and that's what I was going to. My biggest storyline outside of Jerry Hughes, of course, and this is by far the biggest one to me, is can Khalil Davis take the helm as this team's starting defensive tackle? Because you take a look at what he was able to do last year. He came in, I think, a week or two before training camp, ended up becoming one of everybody's favorite players in training camp. They released him, brought him back on the practice squad roster, and by week 4, week 5, the young man was signed to the 53-man roster for the rest of the season. And while playing in 15 games, 41% of the snaps, you already saw he was able to do a little bit. 32 tackles, 2 sacks. This young man literally made a difference for that defensive front. And John, I'm looking at him saying to myself, look, for the very first time in his career, especially as an undrafted guy who came in with nothing to lose last year, made a name for himself, and ended up being one of Coach D'Amico Ryan's most valuable players on that defensive front. This year is his time to say, I'm winning this starting job, especially considering so many people like you and I have done time and time again on this show have questioned, did the Houston Texans do enough with their interior defensive line in order to make sure that they live up to Ryan's expectation?
Also with that, man, we got to look at Rod Wright. Excuse me. We got to look at Coach Rod Wright. He's going to be the full-time defensive line coach this year. And if you look at his history, especially going back to his Miami days, he's been able to get the most out of players. I'm going to be real with you guys. Sheldon Rankins and Malik Collins was very good for Houston to close out the year. They combined for 11 sacks. They also combined for nearly 30 QB hits, nearly 20 tackles for loss. And it was for sure they were your D tackles. This year, we know that it's going to be Autry playing at, 4I, 3 tech. I don't think we're going to see Autry in that 1 or 2 spot gap, a gap, but I think that he's a lock, right? There isn't a second lock. So whoever is going to be a player that I don't know if that player has a longer leash like Rankins and Malik Collins, 2 vets from last year. They may have a short leash. So I'm looking to see how he coaches up maybe a Tim Settle, maybe a Fadu Kowski to get the best out of him. I'm looking to see how he coaches up Kirk. We cannot forget about Kirk. And do I think he's going to compete for the starting role? Not necessarily, but this is going to be a spot position where guys are going to be interchangeable. And he may be an odd guy out. He may be somebody, right? We never know. But how can Coach Rod get the best out of some of these guys that are not a shoe-in to start? And if they're not a shoe-in to start, okay, you didn't get the starter role, understand that. But on the flip side, we're going to need you to come in and play about 30% of the defensive snaps. How can we maximize this player in that role? So I'm excited to see what he can do from a coaching standpoint, kind of like Dino Vasso. How can you get the best out of the players that you've been given? Welcome back in, Locked On Texans listeners and viewers. Before we close out today's show, I definitely, again, want to say that we are praying for anybody that was impacted or affected by Hurricane Beryl in any way. Praying for you guys, and we hope that everybody is able to see this thing through. We got a training camp in a few days, man. So that's going to be the highlight for a lot of Texans fans. They got those dates where you can get out there. And I think this is the most dates they've had to get out there since
probably
since year.
Probably before that. Let's say maybe 20.
Gary Kubiak?
Yeah, well, I would say, what was that? That would have to be what, going into the 18 or 19 season with Deshaun D-Hop.
Yeah, that was a fun year for Texans fans.
Yeah.
It's been a while, but you guys will be able to get out there and look at training camp and see training camp for yourself, the practices. And Cody and I, we're going to shift to who's on the bubble entering training camp. I know for me, Cody.
And
let's get the depth chart up. Ali Gay. I think Marcus Haynes and Marcus Harris and Solomon Byrd. I think those are all going to end up being either guys that are cut or practice squad guys. Houston is going to retain a couple of those guys to make sure that they get an opportunity to coach them up and see if they can maximize the best out of them, maybe for the next year or two. I think Kirk could be on the bubble. I think Kirk has an opportunity to make this roster, but he does seem like an odd man out, especially with Derek Barnett coming back. Tim Settle, who has a lot more NFL experience. Khalil Davis, who had a very good year for where he came from in the NFL. Mario Edwards, some of those guys I think just pushes Kurt down, and I could see the battle between Marcus Harris and Kurt Hinish, that being a good camp battle. But I think when I look at some of these guys, man, I think I see a lot of practice squad guys.
And I would 100% agree. But John, I might surprise you with this one. The one guy I think that might be on the bubble now is Mario Edwards Jr. And I say that because I go back to how the way, and look, this is good for our guy, but I go back to the way Kenyon Green manhandled him during mandatory mini camp. I look at that, and I also take a look at the signing of someone like Jerry Hughes. Yes, Jerry Hughes is a defensive end, but the Houston Texans, they like to move guys around on the defensive line who has showcased the ability to play both on the inside and the outside. And I look at Mario Edwards, and I'm thinking to myself, maybe, just maybe, there was something that Coach DeMeco Ryans did not see out of Edwards during those mandatory minicamp practices that say, you know what, let's make sure we bring in an insurance policy just in case you continue to be on the downside of things. But John, I agree with you. The other guy that I'm looking at that might be an odd man out is Kirk Kenish as well.
I'm looking at some of these guys, and I see a lot of guys that were rotational players. Fadukowski only played in 40% of the defensive snaps for Jacksonville in 23, 46 and 22. His career high was the New York Jets with 53 and 21. Mario Edwards has been for the most part, he's been a rotational guy for the last couple of seasons. Tim Settle, he hasn't been a household name, so there's 3 or 4 guys competing for one spot, and I think because Khalil Davis has already been in the system already, knows Matt Burke, knows Coach Wright, knows DeMeco Ryans, that gives him an edge. Thank you guys for listening and watching today's episode of the Locked On Texans podcast. Please be safe out there. Follow us on Twitter at Locked On Texans. Give me a follow on Twitter at John_Hickman12. And then once again, we are definitely praying for all of our families that are impacted by this hurricane.
Yes, sir. And as always, I'm your host, Cody M. Davis. Please remember to follow me on Twitter at CodyDavis_24. Once again, that's Cody, COTYDAVIS_24. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, peace.